Welcome to our final week of exploring the many faces of violence in our culture today. Now, next week, we're going to begin a new study series as we dig deeper into the narrative of the Gospel according to Luke. And the title of this series is going to be Jesus, No Strings Attached. Now, Luke's narrative of the life and teachings of Jesus is different because it's a case statement made to make Jesus attractive to the Gentiles, the non-Jewish community. For Luke, there was no strings attached. Jesus was Jesus, his life and teachings. And it's a fresh look at Jesus that we're going to participate in for the next few weeks with that series of Jesus, No Strings Attached. But that's next week. Now we return to our last session addressing the many faces of violence in our culture today. Our culture has been described as one in which the normalization of violence has occurred. Violence has become a given in our life together. Okay, if that's the case, some of you might disagree with that, but let's say that for the sake of our work together, that we admit that there's many faces of violence in our culture today. What's the calling of our faith in response to the many faces of violence? Now, so you understand where I'm coming from, I want to briefly share with you my journey of engagement, if you will, in my life in terms of facing violence in many different venues and experiences. I want to start with our family walking around Oak Park in Wichita on Sunday afternoon, which we did. If it was nice weather, we went to Oak Park. And we witnessed together a father violently spanking his child for some behavior. Now, I had never been spanked for misbehaving. So I asked my dad why my brother and I never got spanked. And he replied, I do not want you to learn that spanking, intentionally hurting another, is the way to get your way. Sort of set a framework for me. I attended Friends University in Wichita and witnessed Professor Bowman, a Quaker, explain to recent veterans of the Korean conflict why he was a conscientious objector. I learned something from those experiences of dialogue. In graduate school, I sat at the feet of Professor George Kelsey, who had a student a few years previous whose name was Martin Luther King. He was Martin Luther King's seminary professor on Christian ethics. Very formative. And then during my ministry, I was privileged to meet and was engaged by Bishop Tutu, the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. These and other events leads me to remind all of us to the witness of three persons who in the last 100 years have witnessed to the way of nonviolence in the many faces of violence we face. First, Mahatma Gandhi, whose proclamation and actions are best summarized by his own words, quote, "Without a direct action expression of it, non-violence, to my mind, is meaningless." Now, in my words, what Gandhi is saying is nonviolence is more than a verbal witness. It is action, a way of life. Second, Martin Luther King, who was significantly influenced by Gandhi. And Martin Luther King said, quote, "Nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political and moral questions of our time. Nonviolence is a sword that heals. Darkness cannot drive out darkness." To repeat, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. End of quote. In my words, King said, nonviolence is the path to healing a culture torn apart by the many faces of violence. Then Bishop Tutu, whose life portrays the search for reconciliation built on the understanding of nonviolence, a way of life based on Ubuntu, quote, "I am you and you are me. What happens to you happens to me. We are woven together. I am you and you are me. We must not become like the system we oppose. We must remember that we have been given a wonderful cause." End of quote. In my words, the way of nonviolence is the way of peace. Now, as followers of Jesus, we discover that Gandhi, who was a follower of Jesus but not a Christian, King, who was a follower of Jesus, who was often in tension with the established Christian communities of faith, Tutu, a follower of Jesus, who led a secular culture to embrace the way of nonviolence to restore a culture in which the many faces of violence had ripped apart. You see, we discovered that these three persons based their convictions on the teachings and life of Jesus. Jesus taught his followers to express agape love to all, including one's enemies. Jesus, who taught that persons of faith were to be as children, expressions of sympathy, kindness, and generosity of a child. The characteristics of the life of a child, all expressions of nonviolence. Jesus, who taught to put up thy sword, for all who will take up the sword will die by the sword. Jesus, whose birth was announced to the world peace on earth, goodwill among all. The way of nonviolence coexists with agape love. A man by the name of Paulo Freire has written this quote: "Every relationship of domination, exploitation, or oppression is by definition violent." Let me share that with you again. Quote, "Every relationship of domination, exploitation, or oppression is defined as violent." Friends, this is true in our homes, our secular and sacred communities, our state, and our nation. This led me 3 months ago to arrive at a working definition of violence, and you've heard it before in these weeks together. Violence is any intentional or unintentional, covert or covert act or force which denies or refuses to respect the identity, the value, the rights, or humanity of another human being. Probably would have been easier to remember Freire's statement: every relationship of domination, exploitation, or oppression is by definition violent. You see, as persons of faith, followers of Jesus, I believe we're called to be advocates and agents of peace. Naming and claiming violence whenever and wherever it is encountered in our homes, communities, states, or nation. Always basing our words and behavior on the revelation and the life and teachings of Jesus that are captured in the words of the songwriter. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that is meant to be. With God our Creator, children all are we. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my solemn vow, to take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth. And in the face of violence in our culture today, let it begin with me. It's been a marvelous 12 weeks on this subject. And for your thought and conversation, I conclude with these questions. What have been your experiences of being exposed to nonviolence as a viable way of life? What have been your experiences that have encouraged you to accept the normalization of violence? And what is your response to Jesus' teaching that offered agape love as the alternative to every relationship of domination, oppression, and exploitation? Thanks for being a part of the journey together.